Terrorism is a major threat to international peace and security. Terrorism destroys lives and sets back development. Terrorism is not associated with any race or religion. No country is immune.
Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, dear colleagues. I have the honor to be joined today by our 4 distinguished reporters who have led the 4 expert sessions in which we have seen active participation and engagement on a broad range of counter-terrorism and prevention and countering violent extremism issues pertaining to the conference. Each rapporteur will have the floor for their presentation for 10 minutes maximum. Also, please be reminded that immediately following this session, we will move to the closing session. And I request each of you to remain seated after this session for the closing. And before the closing procedure, we will show you a movie, a short film about the activities of my office. So please remain seated before the start of the closing session. Our first distinguished speaker is Mr. Eldor Aripov, moderator of panel discussion 1, addressing the conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism. Eldor, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Уважаемый господин Воронков, роли Астхана, Ашита Металл,
Madam Rolia Asthana, Madam Ashta Mittal, Madam Elena Kupchina, distinguished representatives of this conference. Before I report on the results of the first section, on the first breakout event, I would like to thank United Nations Office for Counterterrorism, the OSCE Secretariat, United Nations Regional Center for Preventive Diplomacy for Central Asia, for the joint work towards the preparation of this particular conference, which is an important event, which was initiated by Uzbekistan's President, distinguished Shavkat Miramonovich Mirziyoyev, and it has sure become an important milestone in the development of successful cooperation in Central Asia on some of the most topical issues pertaining to regional security. Just to give you an example of how efficient and productive was our conference, we can give you some of the issues that were covered by the Tashkent Declaration on global challenges. Actually, it was here in Tashkent that we started our interaction for the upcoming 10-year period. All the speakers of yesterday and today's, all the high-level experts and guests, not only did they highlight some of the most important results of our cooperation, but urged the participants to strengthen the coordination of all the stakeholders and involved parties to join their efforts in fighting terrorism. And I believe this is for a good reason, that as a next initiative, the President of Uzbekistan suggested to open the office of UNOCT here in Tashkent. And this structure should become a very efficient mechanism for permanent monitoring of counterterrorism activities here in the region. Besides, this office can act as the coordinator for the work carried out by other regional and international organizations who are working in this particular area across the region. As a logical continuation of our conference, the President of Uzbekistan also proposed for 2023 to hold a high-level conference under the aegis of Uzbekistan dedicated to the topic of inter-religious and inter-ethnic tolerance, and I'm confident that this conference would make a major contribution to the implementation of the United Nations General Assembly resolution of 2018 on the special religious tolerance education resolution, which seeks to eradicate illiteracy, religious intolerance, and promote mutual understanding, harmony for the sake of the world and on this planet. We really hope that this important initiative would be supported by all our partners. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about the work of the first breakout session, which discussed one of the key topics regarding the factors that are conducive to the spread of terrorism, I'd like to highlight that we had a very interesting exchange on the practical experience to implement United Nations global counterterrorism strategy. And the keynote speakers during that session were some of the most world-known experts from OSCE, United Nations organization agencies, and other international organizations, who highlighted that a typical feature for all Central Asian countries is the application of preventive measures that seek, first and foremost, to protect most vulnerable populations, such as youth, women, and others. Given the fact that Central Asian region is one of the youngest regions in the world, all Central Asian countries have adopted and updated their conceptual documents in the area of youth, focusing on employment and professional development. In Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan's legislations, we can find regulations that seek to prevent the recruitment of young people by terrorist organizations. These include improving access to information, creating new jobs, and reintegration of the returnees. The other important factor of success to encountering extremism and terrorism is the combination of whole-of-government approach with the entire society involvement. At the same time, the battle against terrorism should focus also on the promotion of human rights and freedoms. Of special importance are concerns such as money laundering, including through cryptocurrencies, spreading extremist materials online, and the work, still active, persisting work of some terrorist organizations in Afghanistan. And we're also discussed some of our measures that we take to return our citizens to our region, to our countries from conflict zones. And the countries have accumulated a crucial experience and practices in terms of reintegration and adaptation of the returners. Central Asian countries have in fact become champions in developing very specific practices for returnees, and Tashkent Declaration has a specific article on this particular subject. We also suggested to introduce special mechanisms for countering extremism and terrorism related materials online, to strengthen youth policies, empower women in the life of societies, their stronger involvement in nations' political, social, and economic life, strengthen the exchanges of legal practices and regulations in the area of counter-terrorism and extremism. So overall, all the attendees of the breakout session agreed that the adoption of the Tashkent Declaration and of the updated plan of action demonstrated the commitment of Central Asian countries to a continuous partnership in fighting terrorism and ensuring regional security and stability. Thank you.
Thank you for your valuable presentation, Mr. Aripov. Our next speaker is Dr. Rolia Astana, moderator of the panel discussion 2, Preventing and Countering Terrorism. Rolia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, distinguished Chair, distinguished panelists, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I had the privilege of chairing the second panel discussion, which was on preventing and countering terrorism. First of all, I must congratulate the organizers for convening a truly excellent world-class panel drawn from national, regional, and international organizations, academics, and civil society, covering every aspect of this really complex subject. The discussion was of a very high level, and I personally, for me, it was an amazingly rich set of presentations and interventions from which I learned a lot. Interventions were delivered by representatives of the 5 Central Asian states, international and regional organizations such as Eurasian Group on Combating Money Laundering and the Financing of Terrorism, Interpol, Anti-Terrorism Center of the Commonwealth of Independent States, Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the European Union-funded Law Enforcement in Central Asia project, and the Border Management Program in Central Asia, plus international experts, academia, and civil society organizations. 3 things particularly stood out for me from this incredibly rich and complex set of presentations. And I was coming at it particularly from a development perspective. So for me to see the interface between development and security played out in this way was really interesting. So the first point for me was that this is not just a security or law and order issue, but it spans the whole gamut of social, economic, political, cultural issues. And therefore, the kind of approaches that were discussed covered policy, regulation, technology, information, communication, a whole set of approaches. The second thing that stood out for me is that there is a lot of commonality in approaches. So while you have to be context specific, of course, there is a lot that can be regionalized, that can be broadly accepted, and also there is need for these approaches to evolve as contexts themselves evolve. And so leading on to my third observation, which is that the potential for regional collaboration is immense, whether it's lesson learning, information sharing, or even piloting in different parts or different countries and then scaling up once we know what works and what doesn't. So to get into specific recommendations, participants outlined key regional and national challenges, lessons learned, and good practices on preventing and countering terrorism, and suggested some practical recommendations for action. And some of these I'll go through. First, strengthened coordination of CT and PCVE efforts among international organizations and donors in Central Asia, while ensuring inclusion of civil society organizations. Second, taking into account increasing terrorist threats in cyberspace in Central Asia, further capacity building and technical assistance is required to counter various forms of extremism in the information and technology realm. Third, the need to further enhance capacity building in countering the financing of terrorism through online platforms, cryptocurrencies, etc. Fourth, the urgent need to address emerging security challenges and threats emanating from Afghanistan. Fifth, building resilience among youth and preventing their recruitment and radicalization through the internet and countering terrorist propaganda and hate speech by promoting education, development of critical thinking skills, media, and communication literacy. And sixth, strengthening the preventive measures by addressing marginalization, social exclusion, stigmatization, and isolation of communities, empowering women and the youth as well as migrant workers. So as you can tell, it was not just a very rich set of presentations, but a really granular and specific set of recommendations, which I'm sure will be followed up and turned into collaborative action plans and implementation plans. And on behalf of the UN in office in Uzbekistan, we look forward to supporting and helping in any way that we can. So in the end, I'd once again like to congratulate the organizers, the government of Uzbekistan, UNOCT, and the RCCA and OSCE. And I want to give special mention to the excellent translation and interpretation skills that have been available throughout at this conference actually, which for someone like me have been absolutely invaluable in making sure that I don't miss any part of this rich discussion. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Astana, for very kind words addressed to the organizers of this conference. I fully share your view that it is a successful story. And thank you very much for your comprehensive and thoughtful presentation. Now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Ashita Mittal, moderator of panel discussion number 3, Building States' Capacity to Prevent and Combat Terrorism and to Strengthen the Role of the United Nations System. Ashita, the floor is yours, please.
Dobro din, Assalamu alaikum, a very good afternoon, distinguished participants. Mr. Voronkov, it's indeed a privilege to be here today, and I can really add my words of appreciation to the government of Uzbekistan for hosting this very important conference, and to the organizers of UNOCT, which is really, I consider, as our coordination body on all of the work that we do on counterterrorism, to OSCE and UNRCCA. Indeed, this conference has brought together distinguished speakers, participants, but a great platform for all of us to share our experiences, our expertise, but also the firm commitment that we believe in a culture of peace, stability and security for this entire region. My congratulations to everybody for the adoption of the Joint Plan of Action and also the Tashkent Declaration, which is extremely important documents that have been also drafted. The panel 3, which was focusing on building states' capacity to prevent and combat terrorism and to strengthen the role of the United Nations system in that regard, all of the panelists almost resonated what was also already reflected in the Joint Plan of Action that has been developed in exhaustive consultations with the countries in the region. So therefore, I would say this is truly a work that is nothing for us without us, that meant exhaustive consultations at all levels. I have to say that during the session today, we had really eminent specialists, experts who came from a wide range of institutions that worked on strengthening of law enforcement capacities, criminal justice responses, but also we had representatives from the media and also the international organizations, the United Nations, and also from SICA. I can say that there were almost like 20 speakers, but we also had the fortune of getting pre-recorded messages from the Executive Director of United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, Ms. Gada Wali, Mr. Mikuria, who is the Secretary General of the World Customs Organization, and also from Mr. Chen, the Acting Executive Director of the CTAD. And also, I would say that what was distinct was that everybody spoke about the emerging threats and challenges, which meant that when we're looking at preventing violent extremism, we would have to really look at a very young population. That is the resource and is actually a demographic dividend of this entire region that actually houses more than 60% of the population that is below the age of 30 years. And I can say that in every single presentation that was made in the panel, they did reflect on their concerns and how do we engage and develop a culture of I would say, intercultural tolerance and also intolerance to violent extremism. And therefore, I would say that this is important that today, as we go through transformative changes in the Central Asian region, this culture of developing a culture of rule of law and also peace and security becomes very important. During our session today, we discussed and exchanged opinions on how to develop capacities of Central Asian states to prevent and combat terrorism and to extend the role, as I said, of the United Nations system. But we also felt that it's important to acknowledge the role of other international organizations that can also bring to the fore their expertise in moving forward. And one of the examples was to look at a repository of experts from the region who can contribute to the joint plan of action in the implementation of it. All participants in our session acknowledged the importance of regional dialogue, cooperation, and connectivity to address challenges and priorities of common concerns with respect to new and emerging threats, but also they emphasized that UN can play a facilitation role and knowledge-sharing role to expand international, regional, bilateral, and local cooperation to prevent and counter terrorism, using the framework of the Joint Plan of Action for effective and balanced implementation of United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy in Central Asia. And I have to acknowledge that it was also said that we need to find a moment to reflect on what worked and what didn't work, so that we can really build on the lessons learned from the past 5 years in the implementation of the first cycle of the plan. It is important to continue and foster capacity development, technical assistance programs, and projects by international and regional partners, wider range of UN system organizations, including the Global Counter-Terrorism Coordination Compact, involving specialized UN agencies, OSCE, SICA, amongst others. Prevention of violent extremism and terrorism amongst risk groups, including youth, was one of the key focus of our discussions. The constructive cooperation with civil society, media, local communities, academia, and youth leaders is important to maximize both state and UN efforts in this area. To enhance the capacity of criminal justice systems' responses to terrorism, national criminal justice systems should be strengthened to ensure access to legal aid and full adherence to fair trial standards in terrorism-related cases, transparency, accountability in criminal investigations, and proceedings in accordance with obligations under the international laws. Almost all of the countries reflected the many strategies that have been adopted to make changes in the legislations, but to also look at the review of their criminal codes and criminal procedure codes. The effective criminal justice responses should also provide adequate rehabilitation and reintegration for returnees in compliance with international law, including international human rights law. Countries in Central Asia can actively share best practices in introducing the community policing approaches to prevent and counter terrorism and violent extremism, as well as conducive as and when conducive to terrorism and the framework of police reforms. Many participants reflected on prevention of radicalization to violence and violent extremism in prisons. Countries' capacities to strengthen, to provide opportunities to prisoners to be engaged in meaningful activities, in particular vocational training and employment, in addition to follow-up mechanisms, shall be available for post-prison reintegration that also includes support to families and communities, as well as employment opportunities. To boost the capacity of national and regional counterterrorism units and to promote inter-regional organizations and inter-regional organizations exchange networks, UNOGCs, UN agencies could facilitate networking platforms, share available tools and instruments, and organize training courses, and build the capacities of law enforcement, judiciary, concerned universities, and other stakeholders. I have to also reflect a presentation that was made by my colleague from UNHCR, who drew the attention to the issues around refugees and also on asylum seekers who are amongst the most marginalized populations, and that we need to basically make sure that we must have an inclusive process to look at this population, and this may become an issue of concern in this region, but this region has to be was also complemented for the work they have done on statelessness, which is incredible. This is something that is to be complemented to this region and something that we can build on for the future too. So I believe that we had a great discussions and were really that could really enrich the way forward. But one of the suggestions was that we must look at a monitoring mechanism that looks at the implementation of the joint plan of action so that we can regularly evaluate and see the strength of the work, but also make mid-course corrections so that we stay on that path. Thank you to the distinguished panelists in the third panel for their suggestions and their contributions, and thank you to the organizers for including this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell, for your very encouraging, energetic, and forward-looking presentation. You mentioned a very important point: better coordination and coherence among the actors in the field is one of the prerequisites for the successful story. I fully share your view, and I think we need to attract more and more attention to this part of our common activities. So thank you very much for your contribution to this discussion. Now I would like to ask the next speaker, Her Excellency Ambassador Elena Kuchina, moderator of panel discussion for ensuring respect for human rights for all and rule of law as a fundamental base for the fight against terrorism, to take the floor. Alena, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, dear Mr. Chair, dear Vladimir, and Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It is my real pleasure to summarize the discussions that took place within the panel 4, which I had a privilege to moderate, and I would like to record with you that the discussion within this panel was very much rich, very much thought-provoking, with the participation of highly professional and very much committed panelists, and also all those who took part with the interventions from the floor. And I'm very much grateful to all those who contributed to the discussion. Let me start by underlining the focus of this session: respect for human rights for all and the rule of law as the fundamental basis of any measure against terrorism, as stated in the 4th pillar of the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy. In line also with the OSCE commitments, human rights, fundamental freedoms, and the rule of law must be protected and promoted at all times while countering terrorism, in order for these measures to be effective instead of becoming counterproductive. As part of this approach, we must look beyond the symptoms of terrorism to recognize potentially underlying causes and drivers, and this was mentioned by several speakers in the panel. Dependent on this analysis, such conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism and violent extremism should be mitigated at the local, national, and regional levels. Examples of such drivers can include a difficult economic situation, related youth unemployment, lack of education, and the issue of education was emphasized on several occasions, or other perspective. These factors can then also be exacerbated by an unstable situation in the neighboring countries, as Central Asia is experiencing today once again with regard to Afghanistan. As discussed this morning as well, the criminal justice system needs to be strengthened with regard to important rule of law principles, such as fair trial or compliance with judicial guarantees, the prevention of torture, as well as the protection of witnesses and victims. Another factor that was highlighted within our panel is the importance of ensuring that counter-terrorism legislation takes into account the different effects it might create for women and men, and to also include such considerations in all aspects of the corresponding legal procedures. This is an important aspect also for the next topic discussed by the panel, given that Central Asian states have been front-runners in the repatriation and rehabilitation of foreign terrorist fighters and their families. During our discussions, we have been able to learn about the challenges and the good practices developed in respective rehabilitation and reintegration efforts. Moreover, we heard about the close coordination between national and international experts in the preparations of repatriation operations. Considering that most of these returnees to Central Asia so far were women and children, the need for a particularly considerate approach becomes apparent. There are further problems to address, as we have seen during this session. One of the most pressing issues seems to be ensuring compliance of national and regional counterterrorism regulations with international human rights, humanitarian and refugee law. As one example, in this context, we discussed about the importance of foreign terrorist fighters being prosecuted and held accountable in accordance with due process and fair trial guarantees. Omissions in this regard could constitute human rights violations, which would then also feed into the terrorist narrative to recruit new followers. Moreover, the need for continued work with the public was highlighted in order to reduce the stigmatization of returnees and to achieve broader public support for their rehabilitation. Preparing receiving communities for the arrival of foreign terrorist fighters returnees and ensuring continued support seems crucial for a successful reintegration back into an accepting society. This important point, for your information also, was discussed among Uzbek and international experts during a related side event hosted yesterday by the OSCE on the margins of this conference, where we had the opportunity to hear about related efforts by civil society organizations and government agencies here at the Uzbek-Afghan border. With this, and with once again huge grateful from my side to the organizers of this conference and to all those who contributed to the discussion within panel 4, I would like to conclude my short summary of the discussions which taken place in panel 4. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your intervention, for your thoughtful views and ideas. I appreciate very much our cooperation with OSCE. I think that OSCE has many comparative advantages to work, especially in this very region, close to the governments, and to implement the agenda, which is very important from counterterrorism and prevention of violent extremism perspectives. So, with this, I would like to thank all our distinguished rapporteurs for their valuable ideas and presentations. And with this, I would like to close the plenary wrap-up. As I mentioned before, please remain seated. It will be a short film about the activities of the Office of Counterterrorism demonstrated now. So thank you very much for your attention.
"2021 saw several key milestones in the United Nations efforts to prevent and counter terrorism, including the 15th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy and the 10th anniversary of the UN Counterterrorism Center. We also commemorated the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terrorist attacks and the resolute actions taken by the Security Council in response that continue to galvanize international counter-terrorism efforts. We pay tribute to the victims and survivors of terrorism around the world on multiple occasions, including through a special ceremony with the 9/11 Memorial in New York, which hosted over 300 dignitaries from more than 120 member states and international organizations. In August, we marked the International Day of Remembrance of and Tribute to the Victims of Terrorism.
Remembrance means honoring those who have lost their lives. But it also means looking forward and understanding our responsibility to prevent more deaths. This is why the United Nations is committed to preventing terrorism, including by addressing conditions conducive to the spread of terrorism and supporting efforts to hold terrorists accountable for the suffering they have caused.
Throughout 2021, promoting multilateralism against terrorism remained at the center of UNOCT's efforts. The Secretary-General's report on Our Common Agenda called for continued cooperation to prevent and counter terrorism. UNOCT's new strategic plan and program framework for 2022 to 2025 will outline our mission, vision and goals to help build a world free from terrorism. UNOCT's agenda continued to enjoy wide support from member states and partners, thanks to the political and policy leadership of Under-Secretary-General Vladimir Voronkov. In June, UNOCT convened the second Counter-Terrorism Week, including the second high-level conference of heads of counter-terrorism agencies of member states, with over 2,000 participants reflecting on the challenges of the new decade for preventing and countering terrorism in the age of transformative technologies. A record number of 36 online side events recorded over 25,000 total viewers. The week concluded with the General Assembly adopting a strong consensus resolution on the 7th Biennial Review of the Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy, which will guide global counter-terrorism efforts for the next 2 years. Led by UNOCT, the Coordination Committee spearheaded the work of the UN Global Counter-Terrorism Coordination Compact, while its 8 working groups held 44 meetings. As a result of the coordination efforts of this Global Coordination Compact, the UN Multi-Year Appeal for Counter-Terrorism was launched as an interactive digital tool to coordinate UN resource mobilization efforts. The 2021 to 2022 appeal calls for $179 million for 52 projects and programs from entities of the Counter-Terrorism Coordination Compact. For the second year running, the Counter-Terrorism Coordination Platform continued to provide a virtual forum connecting 43 entities and 131 member states. The platform has had over 100,000 visits since it was launched in 2020. Through the COVID-19 pandemic, UNOCT ensured business continuity while prioritizing staff well-being. Leveraging innovative new technologies, we delivered further and better on our mandate with an expanded toolbox for greater efficiency and impact. UNOCT's field presence in Ashgabat, Baghdad, Bangkok, Bishkek, Brussels, Dhaka, Khartoum, Manila, Ouagadougou, Budapest, Doha and Rabat ensured the delivery of impactful and cost-effective technical assistance in close proximity to beneficiaries through an all-of-UN approach, including increased collaboration, coordination and synergies with the Resident Coordinator System and other UN country team entities. In addition, UNOCT built up new and existing partnerships, signing 40 Memoranda of Understanding and other agreements. The Office organized 161 high-level bilateral meetings, 676 capacity-building workshops, and over 150 outreach events promoting counter-terrorism efforts while mainstreaming human rights and gender and mobilizing over 20,000 people. At the same time, tailored communication efforts grew by 40% on the web and 50% on social media. In 2021, UNOCT's flagship Countering Terrorist Travel Program to enhance terrorist detection capabilities using API and PNR data expanded to 49 beneficiary countries. Turning 10 years old, the UN Counterterrorism Center has developed as a world center of excellence, running 73 programs and engaging 165 countries to support the implementation of all 4 pillars of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy in areas such as strategic communications to prevent violent extremism, border security, youth engagement, countering terrorist financing, combating weapons of mass destruction, and chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear terrorism and cybersecurity. 2021 also saw the launch of several new UNOCT programs responding to the priorities of member states. In Rabat, we launched the UNOCT Program Office for Counterterrorism and Training in Africa. In Doha, we initiated the International Hub on Behavioral Insights to Counterterrorism and opened the UNOCT Office on Parliamentary Engagement in Preventing and Countering Terrorism, which organized the first Global Parliamentary Summit on Counterterrorism with the Inter-Parliamentary Union and UNODC in Vienna, and launched the first coordination mechanism on CT and PVE among parliamentary assemblies. In January, we launched the Global Program on Countering Terrorist Threats Against Vulnerable Targets. In September, we launched the Threat Assessment Models Program, and on the margins of the 76th UN General Assembly, UNOCT, UNICEF, and 13 other UN partners launched the Global Framework on UN Support on Syria and Iraq third country national returnees, as over 42,000 foreign women and children remain stranded in overcrowded camps in Syria. In October, we launched the Connect and Learn online platform, offering e-learning courses and supporting communities of practice on CT and PCVE with 465 users in just 3 months. In December, we held events on video gaming and augmented and virtual reality, and we launched the 4th phase of our program with UNRCCA to support the joint plan of action for the implementation of the Global Counterterrorism Strategy in Central Asia. 2021 also saw UNOCT strengthening its engagement with civil society organizations, including through CT Week side events, regular roundtables, and a virtual dialogue with human rights and civil society partners on building a better paradigm to prevent and counter terrorism, with over 320 participants from 67 civil society entities. With less than 3% of our funding needs covered by the United Nations regular budget, UNOCT relies on sustainable, flexible, and predictable funding to deliver on its mandate. None of these achievements would have been possible without the support and trust of our 35 donors, for which we are thankful. We count on your continued support in 2022 as we remain committed to work together for a future without terrorism.
So, good afternoon, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you to the closing session of our conference. Dear Mr. Voronkov, dear Ms. Kupchina, dear Ms. German and Ms. Hakala, dear participants. Now we are in the end of the conference, and before to give the floor to Mr. Voronkov, I would like just to underline that how much it was pleasure for Uzbek side to have all of you in our conference, and we are grateful for all participants for the fruitful discussions, for your recommendations, expressed opinions, shared with us your views on issues of conference. So I have a pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Under Secretary General, United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, Mr. Vladimir Voronkov.
Gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to conclude this high-level international conference. Of course, I'd like to thank His Excellency Abdulaziz Kamilov, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Mr. Viktor Vladimirovich Makhmudov, the Secretary of the National Security Council, for the hospitality extended to all the participants. And also I'd like to thank Natalia German and the Special Envoy of Secretary General and the head of the Preventive Diplomacy Center, Madam Helga Maria Schmidt, from the OECE, for organizing this event in collaboration with my office, and of course the participants of the national governments of different organizations of the UN family, including UNOCT, and our partners from civil society. The participation of all of you made our conference a success. So this conference confirmed the importance of multilateral cooperation and regional interaction in fighting violent extremism and terrorism. And in the course of the last 2 days, we've listened to your interest, your priorities, as also your aspirations with regard to many issues. And of course, thanks to your efforts in repatriation, reintegration, rehabilitation of those who were brought back from the conflict zones, to the change situation in Afghanistan, and also such topics as the anti-terrorist strategy of the UN when it was since its inception. And now we understand better the latest trends that we have to face in the course of the next decade, and we know what we need to do in order to successfully address them. We underscore the importance of prevention, about the importance of inclusiveness, taking youth in the world to the fore, and also provide respecting their rights, and also the importance of rule of law. We outline the pragmatic ways of fighting financing of terrorism, border control, cybercrime, and also preventing the use of internet for terrorist purposes. And we discuss how we can step up regional cooperation, how to use public-private partnership, and how to integrate those people who might have committed crimes. And of course, my activity, I'll continue to support the Central Asian countries by providing technical assistance on all 4 dimensions of the counter-terrorist strategy. Mr. Chairman, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the threat of terrorism requires that we remain vigilant, exchange information, and work together by preventing new challenges and threats. I would like to thank you, as well as your commitment to fight terror, by concerting our efforts, and also which is manifested in the joint plan of action as well as the Tashkent Declaration. And of course, we need to continue to develop, design the national strategies on preventing terrorism and preventing violent extremism. In these strategies, we need to reflect human rights, gender balance, and also promote public-private partnership. And of course, we need to streamline the national programs with the global strategic plan. And of course, a lot has been said about the financial support of the combating the financing terrorism, including some targeted initiatives for Central Asian countries. In conclusion, I would like to reaffirm the commitment of my office to our cooperation with Central Asian countries, and also I count for our future cooperation in addressing this ever-changing terrorist threats in the region. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Voronkov. Of course, we're very appreciative for your personal participation and contribution, and I'm sure that my Central Asian colleagues will join me in assuring you that we in Central Asia continue to work with you in efficiently confronting these new threats and challenges. Для меня теперь большое удовольствие передать слово госпоже Наталье Герман, специальному представителю генерального секретаря ООН по Центральной Азии и руководителю Офиса по борьбе с терроризмом. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants of the conference, I would like to congratulate all of you with successful conclusion of this conference, which lasted for 2 days, and of course those were very productive 2 days where we exchanged views, where we strengthened our working ties with all the Central Asian participants, as well as our regional and international colleagues, and it is very gratifying that the members of the civil society as well as the representatives of the academic circles also took part in it. And of course it is very important that all Central Asian countries adopted a very very able joint plan of action and very important Tashkent declaration, and we're sure that our updated joint plan, just like its predecessor, will lay foundation for the advancement of regional cooperation for the years to come. Currently it's quite hard to predict how long will it serve us, because well, situation is dynamically changing on global arena, but what is important is that by adopting this joint plan of action we have reaffirmed our joint understanding of the issues related to extremism and terrorism, which is yet another sign of the cooperation between the Central Asian countries, which can be an example for many other regions of the world. Just like the joint plan of action on the implementation of the global counter terror strategy remains to be a unique document of this kind. An adoption of this plan is a very important step, but my colleagues, you will agree that maybe practical implementation of this document is equally important. And yesterday I mentioned the joint project of the Regional Center and Counter-Terrorist Directorate of UN that envisages some joint steps and efforts that it is aimed at providing help to all the countries of Central Asia in the implementation of the plan. And one of the concrete steps within the fourth phase of this document is the early warning network establishment for Central Asian countries, and we're also planning activities on efficient management and processing of biometric data, and also combating the propaganda of violent extremism. And of course, despite the all the complex problems in the world, our partners and donors continued to provide assistance in the implementation of the joint plan. We had a lot of words of thanks that were addressed to them, so I would like to second them and express my hope that this cooperation will be continued into the future, and the states of Central Asia at this stage do need this help. In conclusion, I would like once again to express my sincere gratitude to Eastern President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, Shavkat Mirziyoyev, for the initiative of hosting this conference in Tashkent, to Minister Abdulaziz Kamilov for great cooperation and organization of this event, and the Institute for Strategic and Interregional Studies and its director, Mr. Aripov, and his able team for wonderful cooperation that we have seen in the course of the last year. And of course our key partners from counter-terrorists, from the UNOCT, to you personally, Ambassador Voronkov, for everyday coordination, and of course our thanks to the OSCE, as well as all our partners who took active part in making this high-level conference possible, and also for invaluable contribution in preparing this very important document, the Joint Action Plan for the implementation of the global strategy. I'm sure that the Tashkent Declaration will also play its important role, and I support the decision to give this Tashkent Declaration the status of the UN, and also I am sure that, dear colleagues, that all of us will start implementing all those processes, activities and initiatives that we managed to reflect in those two documents. Thank you very much for your attention and for your support. Thank you very much, Madam German, for kind words. I couldn't agree more that we have adopted important documents, but now it is more important to implement it, and so all our discussions reflected this need, and the initiatives that were made by the President of Uzbekistan, Mr. Mirziyoyev, and I'm sure that our partners from UNOCT, OSCE and Central Asian countries will start implementing its provisions, and if we do so, we'll be able to confront all these threats and challenges of extremism and terrorism.
I give the floor to Ms. Alena Kupchina, Ambassador, Coordinator of Activities to Address Transnational Threats from OSCE. Please, Ms. Kupchina.
Thank you very much, dear Mr. Minister. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished colleagues and friends, because after these 2 days of very interesting, challenging sometimes, but very fruitful discussions, all of us, we really gained, and we made much more friendships than before coming here. So after this, once again, 2 interesting days of presentations, discussions, formal, informal, about the important topic of regional cooperation in preventing and countering terrorism, this high-level conference, being held upon the initiative of the President of the Republic of Uzbekistan, is coming to an end, the successful end. There is an impressive list of topics that were covered, of joint action that was taken, and commitments that were renewed during these 2 days. The adoption of the Tashkent Declaration, reiterating some of the main commitments also taken within the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I will mention some of them more in detail in a minute. We had discussions about all the 4 pillars of the UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, being the guideline for corresponding regional efforts. These regional efforts are also reflected in the Joint Action Plan for Central Asia, covering all the 4 pillars and adapting implementation efforts to the regional circumstances. An update of this joint action plan was adopted here in Tashkent. Finally, there were 3 side events on important topics and many bi- or multilateral meetings on the margins of our conference, as well as even more informal discussions, as I already mentioned, sometimes as important as the official program. Also, during the splendid dinner hosted yesterday by the government of Uzbekistan. While I think that we can congratulate each other for this outcome, allow me to use these brief closing remarks to turn our attention towards the implementation of these commitments that were renewed here in Tashkent, also echoing your points, my dear colleagues, Natalia and dear Mr. Minister. We emphasize that the fight against terrorism and the promotion and protection of human rights and the rule of law are not contradictory, but mutually reinforcing, as it is indicated in Para 3 of Tashkent Declaration. This is also a cornerstone of the OSCE's concept of comprehensive security, and as mentioned in my opening address, all of our assistance to participate in states is based on this understanding. The Tashkent Declaration further stressed that terrorism cannot and should not be associated with any religion, nationality, civilization, or ethnic group. It is indicated in the Para 3 of this document. And this is a commitment reiterated also in all related UN Security Council resolutions and the OSCE documents. The 2 main consequences of such a non-discriminatory approach are equally reflected in the Tashkent Declaration. First, the declaration urges us to pursue intercultural, interethnic, and interreligious dialogue wherever possible. And second, it requests from us to prevent and counter terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Last but not least, allow me to stress that while showing leadership 10 years ago with the adoption of the first regional action plan, Central Asian states are today leading by example once again. Their decision to repatriate women and children linked to foreign terrorist fighters and to embark on the difficult journey towards rehabilitation and reintegration together with them were commended also by the United Nations experts. The Tashkent Declaration is rightfully highlighting these achievements and encouraging further efforts in this regard, namely in the Paras 6 and 7. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished friends, these are some of the main points that I wanted to mention here, in order also to connect them with the OSCE's commitment to supporting Central Asia participating states with the challenges ahead, based also on its well-established network of field operations all across the region. And in concluding, let me once again extend our gratitude to the government of Uzbekistan for hosting this important conference, and to the Institute for Strategic and Regional Studies under the President of Uzbekistan, to the UNOCT, UNRCCA, and also to the OSCE project coordinator in Uzbekistan for their cooperation in the organization of this event. And also, I have the honor to invite all the conference participants for a dinner hosted by the OSCE tonight. And of course, I'm wishing everybody traveling a safe journey back home. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kupchina, and we appreciate a lot support and participation of OSCE, your personal participation in this conference, and we are looking for further strength and our mutually beneficial cooperation with OSCE. Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Terry Hakala, Special Representative of the European Union for Central Asia. Please, Ms. Hakala.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. It's a pleasure for me to be here and address you, Your Excellencies, all participants of the conference. This has been very active 2 days. I want to thank the organizers and especially, of course, the Uzbek leadership and government for organizing this, hosting this, and showing us the well-known, famous Uzbek hospitality. Thank you very much. The conference, I think the timing is remarkable because this year also marks the 30th anniversary of your membership in the UN and OSCE for all you Central Asian partners and countries. And the Tashkent Declaration is an excellent achievement. I want to congratulate you on that because it paves the way for our future activities and it's an excellent roadmap strategy for our work, an updated document in rapidly changing and challenging circumstances. The EU is a partner for Central Asia and all Central Asian countries. And we are working very closely with the UN, OSCE and other organizations in this room. Countering terrorism is a top priority for the European Union, and we are contributing to all activities in this region and beyond, together with our partners, OSCE, UN and others. But then we have also our flagship projects, BOMKA and Leica, which have been running for years and will continue to do so. As we all know, security is indivisible. And we need a whole of society approach on national, regional and global level. The message is clear from this conference. We need more cooperation and coordination, coherent work together to fulfill all the tasks we are supposed to do. Together we are stronger and the EU is fully committed to this work. Thank you once more and thank you for your attention. Rahmat.
Thank you, Terry, for your participation, and we appreciate commitment of European Union to further strengthen cooperation with Central Asian countries. I personally see your participation as a logical continuation of our cooperation because 1 week before you were here and we hold the EU Central Asia Conference on Afghanistan. So we are looking to further continue and promote cooperation with the European Union and Central Asian countries. Thank you very much. And with this, now please allow me from Uzbek side make some closing remarks. So, dear participants, Your Excellencies, Head of Delegations, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, on behalf of the Government of the Republic of Uzbekistan, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to all co-organizers and participants of the high-level international conference on regional cooperation among Central Asian states and the joint plan of action for the implementation of the United Nations Global Counter-Terrorism Strategy. Special thanks to our partners, first of all, UNOCT, UNRCCA, OSCE, European Union, and of course we are grateful for delegation of Central Asia, our countries, brotherly countries, to participate in this very important event. During 2 days we had fruitful discussions on all aspects of the implementation of UN Global Counterterrorism Strategy, which by its nature is a unique document aimed at enhancing national, regional and international efforts to combat terrorism. I am happy to underline the importance of adopting Tashkent Declaration and updated Joint Plan of Action. Our discussions once again reaffirmed the importance of the Joint Plan of Action for the implementation of the strategy in Central Asia. It is gratifying to note that the delegations of all countries of the region unanimously expressed their firm determination to take concrete collective measures to combat terrorism and further develop the accumulated experience in implementation of the strategy in regional level. We are grateful to all participants of the conference who made their valuable contribution to the elaboration of the mechanisms for combating terrorism in Central Asia and in the world as a whole. The debates held within the framework of the opening and panel discussions allowed us to deeply analyze our joint efforts and outline the most important prospects for strengthening cooperation in the field of combating terrorism. The addresses by the participants of the international conference demonstrated that over the past years, the countries of the region have taken important steps to implement the Joint Plan of Action, especially in preventing the spread of the extremist ideology and terrorist threats in our region and at the global level. It's gratifying that the results of the international conference have marked the commencement of a new stage of the development of the Joint Plan of Action in our region. I am confident that the joint implementation of an updated version of this important document in Central Asia will contribute to even closer cooperation between the countries of the region and our foreign partners in combating terrorism in the face of new threats and challenges that the world community is facing today. For its part, the Uzbek side is ready to support further common efforts within the framework of the Joint Plan of Action and make an important contribution to give greater momentum to our cooperation in this direction. Before finishing my remarks, I have a small announcement. In few minutes after closing session, expert meeting named the contribution of the Central and South Asia analytical community representatives to ensuring regional security will hold in section Hall A, and our International Institute for Central Asia invite all participants to move directly to this hall. So let me once again thank all participants for your contribution to success of our conference, and with this I declare our conference closed. Thank you and see you again in Tashkent. Thank you.